Hey everyone, welcome to Handing the Shame Back, a show dedicated to supporting survivors of child sexual abuse. We know the numbers are huge and we know we need more resources and support for the beautiful souls out there who have experienced this. As children, we had no choice. So I think it's really important to remember that when dealing with us as survivors. My name's Glory Masters. I'm your host, and as with all shows, there's a trigger warning. So please, if you do start to feel upset, concerned, anxious, please do stop watching. It won't serve you. Go to the show notes below and you'll be directed to some resource and support. In the meantime, I'm bringing Heidi Olson back to you. She's from Missouri. This is part 2 of her interview, and just to remind you, she's an avid reader, she's a coffee lover, she's a business owner, she's an all-round amazing person and survivor. So welcome back to the show, Heidi.
Thanks so much for having me back.
Awesome. So we were at college and we were just kind of looking at you as the young adult, and yeah, just before we move on from that, is there anything else you would like to share with us?
Yeah, so, I think for the trajectory of my life, it got a lot worse before it got better. So not only was there lots of childhood trauma and attachment pain and, childhood sexual abuse, my abuse ramped up in my early 20s. So as we talked about earlier, I had an abuser who abused me for a long time. And um I think the difficulty in the story is when I finally disclosed, my dad actually went over and beat the crap out of this guy. And I think for a lot of people, when they hear that, they're like, that's awesome. And for me, it did not feel awesome. It felt so traumatizing because I had asked my dad, please don't do anything irrational. My dad was and anger was just his number one emotion. So I knew, please don't make this worse. I wasn't sure if I wanted to report to the police or not. I was not I was just trying to wrap my mind around, I'm telling people this happened to me. But because he did that, it forced me to have to report because my abuser went to the hospital, told law enforcement my dad had beat him up. Law enforcement came to my house and asked me where my dad was and asked me to call my dad there and arrested my dad in front of me. And it was incredibly traumatic because I felt like it was my fault. And so then there was this huge pressure from my family of my dad was about to retire. And so it was like, he's going to lose his pension if he gets arrested and gets charged. And please drop your charges against this guy so that everyone can just drop charges and move forward. And so I continued to not have a voice, is what it felt like. Everyone kept making decisions that I didn't get to have a say in. I didn't get to have a say in how my dad reacted. I didn't get to have a say in if I wanted to drop charges or not because I felt like I had to. So my dad, wouldn't lose his pension for retirement. And so I think that when I talk about the fallout being awful, it was awful. And then because 2 people were arrested, my abuser and my dad, everyone, around us knew something terrible had happened. And so I think it just was not, since it was not resolved in the courts, basically both sides agreed to drop charges. It went to the church and the church did a lot of damage. And they basically just said, he can go to the first service and you can go to the second one, and like just 2 adults, getting out of control and no acknowledgement of my abuse whatsoever. And so I think for me, because I had no coping skills for how to handle. I've just lost everything that felt like an identity to me, my friends, my community, my church. I was like, I'm going to drink myself into oblivion. And so I did. I spent a good chunk of my 20s I swung from the fawn response over here to this was probably more of the like dissociative kind of response where I don't care who I'm sleeping with. I don't care what I'm doing. I just want to be drunk. I just want to be numb, intoxicated, out of control. So out of control. And my behaviors, are just getting more and more risky. And I think I just felt so broken, but it's like if I was sober and still, I felt so broken and in so much pain, but I could not let myself get there, right? So it's just like, I'll do anything to not feel this brokenness. I'll numb out however I can. And so those years were just a blur of really self-destructive choices. And I think I felt like I deserved it on some level. I deserve to be treated this way.
Yeah, and look, and what you're saying, and thank you so much because it's really useful. And welcome back, survivors, by the way. Lovely to see you. That once again your voice is taken away. Not just in the fact that your dad decided to act and completely disempowered you by not
Yes.
listening or checking in with you. So that
Yep.
happened. Then, of course, he decided to just make it all about him and react how he wanted to, which then meant you then had to carry the fallout and deal with the police when you probably weren't anywhere near ready to even think about disclosing to authorities.
Yep.
And then you start to get your head around that, and shock horror, it's taken away from you again because dad suddenly won't get the retirement he needed to.
Yep.
So you were never a feature, you were never considered, you were never respected, you were never validated or vindicated. 3 times your voice was taken. And
Yep.
even when the police probably said, "What do you want to do?" you still didn't have a voice because you had all those people around you. You remember the fawn response who are dictating,
Yep.
you
Yep.
will do this because look what will happen to me if you don't.
Exactly. Yep.
So when was it ever going to be your time? And no
Right.
wonder you sunk into alcohol, risky behavior, drugs, potentially sleeping with anyone and
Yep.
everything. Why not? No one else. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That's super validating. And I think for people who don't get it, it's like they want to cheer for my dad like he's the hero of the story. And it's like, no, that was so disempowering to me.
No,
Yeah,
no. It was all about
right.
your dad. It was all about him.com. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
So,
Yes. So there was, oh, go ahead. I was gonna say there was no form of justice whatsoever for me in that situation. And really my abuser got off scot-free. I'm sure he went on to abuse more women. He went on to work in a high school. And so I think that was really painful to watch that play out. But I, yes, was in the self-destruct mode. And I think looking back, I've actually been really kind of working through this in counseling where I think in that moment of where you're feeling like, oh, I'm consenting to, this sexual behavior or whatever with this person. But it's like, are you really, when your core belief is, I'm a piece of trash, I deserve terrible things? No, it's not really like a healthy sexual experience. But I feel like we get sold this lie of do whatever you want. But it's like, well, what if it's not coming from a healthy emotional place? It's really damaging.
it is. And
So,
it's on,
yeah,
doesn't it? Don't you find, Heidi, that it reinforces
yes,
what we end up attracting to us, reinforces what we've been conditioned to
yes,
believe about ourselves, which is we're not worthy.
yes, exactly, exactly.
Mm.
So for me, it came to a head. This was about 10 years ago, and I had drunk myself into oblivion. I was about to move to Kansas City, where I live now. I was partying, I was celebrating with friends that I was getting ready to move. And I met this guy that we'd never met before, and he took me back to his house. And it was just this awful experience of I passed out and woke up to him raping me. And that was the moment when I was talking about earlier where I just shut down and was like, it's my fault. I'm never going to tell anyone. Like, I'm just swearing up and down that I will just take this to my grave. And clearly, I put myself in a very vulnerable position. So it's my fault, is how I felt. And so I just bottled it up, kept drinking my way through life and moved to Kansas City. And, my same behaviors were repeating here, but because I had some distance from all the chaos back home, I feel like my body was finally safe enough to start talking to me. So I started having panic attacks. And I think for me, that was just the catalyst of I need help.
Yeah.
Um, so I actually went to a group. I actually called a lady and I was like, I think maybe I'm a sex addict. I don't know what's wrong with me. I keep doing this like same thing over and over. And she's like, I think you're just traumatized, like, which was true.
Yeah.
Which I mean, I'm so thankful for her insight, but she was able to connect. So I was in like a group for women who experience sexual trauma with her. She connected me with an amazing therapist that I still see. And for me, I think that was just the beginning of life doesn't have to look like how it's looked for the last 27 years. Especially the last few of just numbing out and just hating myself. Um, and so healing is not linear, as you all know, right? I think there's this lie of like, also going to therapy and I'll be fine. It is like a spaghetti bowl, right? Like everything's connected and it's confusing and right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, I mean, I am in such a different place now, like, and I'm so thankful for that. But it's not like my life is perfect or that I don't have, things that are
Issue.
hard or I don't still cope in unhealthy ways. Sometimes, like, I would be a liar if I pretended like everything was fine. But I do feel like I'm just miles ahead of where I was at. And so I'm incredibly thankful and feel hopeful to have seen change in my life.
And I love that about you. And I think too, Heidi, I'm going to tear you off a bit here. There is no perfect. We are human beings, whether we are survivors or not. We're going to get it right. We're going to get it terribly wrong. We're going to do stuff and wake up the next morning and think, did I actually? Oh, I did say that. So we're always going to have that. That's part of the human condition. But look at your courage, bravery, determination, and absolute, respect to you about all of this. So moving on, what helped you? It sounds like therapy was great and you're still able to see her today. What helped you start to heal
Yeah.
this?
Yeah. So I would say there were several huge things I can attribute my healing to. One, just physically getting distance from all of that crap.
Yeah.
That helped so much. Physically removing myself from abusive situations.
Yeah.
I needed that. I would have just continued my spiral. I think for me that the type of therapy that's been the most helpful is internal family systems or IFS. I don't know if you've heard of that, but I love it. I am very imaginative. And so my parts talk to me all the time. They were talking to me before I started the interview tonight. But it's been such a beautiful gift to be able to interface with kind of these different parts that need attention and need healing. So that has, I feel like, really expedited my healing is to learn that language and to understand what's happening within me. I think other things is even just learning how to feel safe within my own body, which I'm not still not always great at that, but just even connecting those dots between like I live in my head over here all the time and I'm so unaware of what's happening here. Um, Other things that have been really helpful for me, like how I shared earlier, just experiencing a lot of spiritual abuse. I found a group of women who do inner healing prayer. And of course, I think you have to have a lot of discernment around something like this, but they're just incredible. And it's very similar to IFS, but kind of what they're doing through prayer is sort of
Oh,
talking to some of those young parts of you that are traumatized. And that's just felt so, so incredibly healing to me.
yeah.
So I have loved that, which I get. I know that's not for everyone, but for
But
me, that's been really
perfect.
helpful.
Oh,
Um, and then I think other things that have just been helpful is it's exactly what we're doing here. It's finding safe people, like, and having community where people are committed to healing themselves and they can hold space for hard things. And so I just have some really beautiful friends who have also experienced trauma. And it's like, there's nothing I can say that's going to shock them or scare them or freak them out. And just to have that is such a gift, instead of running to alcohol or, whatever it may be, destructive relationships, to be able to engage with them in a healthy way, like, hey, I'm having a hard time. Like, I get it. Like, that has just made all the difference in the world. So it's a learning, there's been a huge learning curve, but I think, thinking of the last 10 years, those have been the biggest ones.
And the interesting thing is, and I just want to give you this because I just feel there's such beauty and purity of intent coming from you. So I want to honor that in you.
Thanks. Thank
Because
you.
but also, you know, when you think about it, I'll show you a 3-year-old child and I'll show you a 13-year-old girl and I'll show you a 15-year-old. And you can see when you look at them, the innocence and the purity and the not really understanding what could be going on because the cognition is just not there. And
Yes.
that's why in most countries across the world, an adult is not considered an adult until they are 18.
Right.
Anything that happened, in your life or in our lives up to that point that conditioned us to then keep receiving abuse, that wasn't on us, and there was no part of us that had any power in it. So
Yep.
please take that one. And Heidi, there's a couple of remaining questions for you, but one is, what would you advise our beautiful survivor family who will watch this and think about what we're discussing today? Perhaps survivors who are struggling a bit, or survivors that are new to their memory, or any advice you would give them, please?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for a lot of survivors, what I hear them say is, I don't want to go to therapy. Like, there's actually memories I don't want to either bring up because I'm so overwhelmed by it, or I didn't like the last therapist I had, or, it's not for me. And I think I want to validate all of those things are legitimate. I think to find some kind of healing, whatever that looks like it could be equine therapy. It doesn't have to be traditional talking with a therapist, right? There's lots of forms of therapy that could be healing that some don't even require talking. I say to think outside of the box, but also if you can find a therapist who really gets trauma, they're not going to push you to that place that overwhelms you. You get to be in control. You don't have to go to a place that terrifies you. Um, they will let you set the pace. And so I think to take some of that pressure off of just like, I don't want to go in and have to talk about the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I
Mm.
didn't. I waited a very long time before disclosing some of these things or even naming some of my abuse. I remember talking about my 13-year-old experience. I didn't use the words abuse at all. And I remember a therapist saying, I would have to hotline this to Child Protective Services if you were telling this to me as a kid. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, oh yeah, what happened to me was not okay. So,
Mm.
I think that they validate and give language to things and are not going to push. And so I think just to give that encouragement, if you're feeling trepidation, I think it can be done well.
And it also, you may not realize this, but I've just connected a dot that, when you were growing up, you knew very, very strongly that there is no room for child sexual abuse in your family of origin.
Yes.
There's no
Yes.
room, therefore it can't happen. So
Correct.
does it surprise us today that when you're talking to a therapist and she's saying, or the counselor, and she's saying to you, I would have to call the hotline, you're thinking, my gosh, was it? Because you can see how in your
Yes.
mind, we don't have child sexual abuse in our family.
Correct. Right.
So see
That's
the
exactly
connection.
right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I guess I'd be very interested, and I think our audience would be too. Please tell us what you're doing now in the space, because I know you're doing some incredible work. So, Heidi, tell
Yeah.
us about what you're doing now, please.
Yeah, so I've been a forensic nurse for about 10 years now, and I specifically in that role work with children. So I take care of kids who have experienced sexual abuse, and that means collecting evidence from their bodies after sexual assault, providing medical care, doing a genital exam. And I was nervous when I started that job because I was afraid it would be triggering, but it ended up being such a healing healthy thing for me, because what I realized, and again, it's exactly what you're doing, Gloria, is the best part of that job is just being able to sit there and hold space. Like for whatever someone's wanting to disclose, it feels like such an honor to be able to validate and just say, I'm so sorry that happened to you. You know, you're so brave. You deserve to feel safe. Like all the things that I wish that, I would have been told at various points of my life, not to make it about me. Obviously, I don't share any of that with my patients because I don't want to, put the focus on me. But I do think I have a unique perspective in being able to sit there and say, I'm willing to give all of my support to you in this moment because I want that for you. And so I've loved doing that job. I've transitioned out of doing that full time to starting my own business, which I started 2 years ago. And what I realized in being a forensic nurse is just we're seeing an insane amount of kids who are experiencing exploitation and trafficking. And I think they get treated worse than any of the abuse victims because a lot of times there are these behaviors alongside that type of exploitation of substance use and acting out and all of the things, of course, and they just get labeled as bad kid, promiscuous, drug user, runaway, waste of resources. And so for me, I really wanted to step up and say, we have got to recognize this better as healthcare workers. We have to do a better job treating this population with dignity because we're not doing a great job as it is. So that's been my mission the last 2 years is really, a lot of it is just teaching people how to handle disclosure in a way that is not re-traumatizing and how to give someone dignity and kindness in the moment, which seems like basic human dignity, but or sort of basic human kindness, but a lot of people don't have that skill set, unfortunately. So that's what I've been doing is a lot of education around that, and that's been a huge blessing as well.
That's amazing. And I think you would be magnificent at this. And I'm sure survivors watching would agree when I say, gosh, I wish you'd been around when to have someone like you with such empathy and love would have been such a gift. And I think too, there is a thing that, so what if it fills your cup? Isn't that beautiful? That you can actually be the adult there for the smaller you. You know,
Yes, absolutely.
That's
Yes.
so beautiful. And, you know, the education, the resource, the actual unlimited understanding, I suspect a child would turn their head and you'd think, yep, I can see you, that's not okay. You know,
Right.
so I love that about what you're doing. And I guess thank you for being such a gift in this space. It's so powerful for those beautiful children to have
Thank
you.
Thanks. That means a lot. I really appreciate what you're doing as well. And like I shared at the beginning of our first episode, I don't often disclose that I'm a survivor. And part of that is because if I'm working with survivors, obviously I don't want to just empower them and be like, hey, let me tell you my story, because that's not appropriate in that setting. But I think a lot of it also is back to that childhood trauma that we were talking about, where I didn't want to self identify because I didn't want to be the crazy person or however my mom was going to perceive this, that wasn't allowed. And so I think it's been a slow journey of me being willing to step out and say, like, yeah, I have experiences too. Not that, I want to advocate, I want to empower this population, and also to say, I am a survivor also, and it has taken me a long time to get to that place where there's not shame in it or this feeling of like, yeah, but your abuse isn't as bad as someone else, or, all the sort of parts coming up in me. And I think, again, a lot of that comes from not being validated as a kid. So I appreciate what I'm trying to say is I appreciate the opportunity to share my story in a safe place.
Thank you, Heidi. So look, we're coming into close, though please stay right there. An audience, you won't often hear me say this, but I feel a bit lost for words. I feel quite honoured and almost a bit speechless with the work that Heidi is doing, the fact that she's gone through everything she has, and it just shows me how much hope there is, and what a beautiful purity she has about her. So audience, once again, look after who you are, know that you are seen, know that you are believed, and that I will always stand beside you until next time.